They always are. But we are happy to be here to chat with you about some holiday travel, and we'll do some introductions really quick. I am Lauren Walker. I am a senior member success specialist at Scott's Cheap Flights, and this is...
And I am Daniel. So I am our senior member operations specialist. I'm writing the deals that you see in your inbox from time to time. So we're here. And we're both doing lovely.
Yeah, exactly. And so given the time of year, we wanted to do a Facebook Live about holiday travel. Many people may have already booked their travel. Maybe people are just gathering together with a close group of friends or family. But we wanted to have a conversation about that. And of course, field any and all of your travel related questions. So please pop them into the chat and we will definitely get to them. But to start off, Daniel, you were telling me before we hopped on that you read a really interesting article about Thanksgiving travel.
That's right. So, normally we would be recommending that you would have bought your Thanksgiving travel a long time ago, but this year is a little bit different. United Airlines has put out a really interesting press release just last day or so. They're saying they're adding over 1,400 flights domestically for Thanksgiving week. So what they say they're doing is taking a data-driven approach to adding capacity. And this is fascinating. They just have never done this before. No one's been trying to mess with schedules this close to departure time. That's a very irritating thing, of course. A lot of you probably have bought itineraries where you had a last-minute schedule change. Maybe you had a nonstop flight. They added a stop. They canceled it, moved it around. But this means they're adding a lot of extra capacity. They're willing to put bigger planes into service if a lot of people are buying tickets. So it's kind of a weird time for buying Thanksgiving travel. Like there's going to be more last-minute opportunities than usual, I would go so far as to say. And I think that's good for those of us who have procrastinated.
Exactly. I mean, it's never great to buy at the last minute because every day you wait, the price is going to go up. And now that we're kind of inside 2 weeks, you want to book as soon as possible. But with Daniel's just said, it could be better, especially on that airline.
I was shocked yesterday. We were seeing some transcon flights from between New York and Los Angeles for about $170, which is, I mean, for Thanksgiving, that's pretty outstanding at the last minute. You've probably seen some cheaper prices than that from us in general, but for last minute holiday in an uncertain demand year, pretty good. I'd take that.
Yeah. And and I was thinking of another tip too about points when it comes to last minute travel and utilizing those. And definitely, Daniel, weigh in here what you think about it. But if you have points to use, especially if they're going to be expiring soon or anything like that, definitely think about using those for a last minute trip. It could definitely save you some money.
And probably what you want to do there is you want to stick to programs that at least have some sort of award chart or at least dynamic pricing and don't have like a fixed dollar value. So like if you're using Southwest points, those basically have a fixed number of cents per point. You're not going to get as much value out of that. But if you're looking at an award redemption domestically that is maybe higher than the aspirational travel you might like to do, it's not like long haul business class, but if that cash price is high, it's actually well worth doing. Or even just using Chase points or Amex points to pay directly through those credit cards travel portals as well.
Well, let's think about next month, because this is a whole season of lots of different holidays, not just, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. I mean, there are lots of holidays during this time where people have off of work. Their kids might be, on break from school. And you're thinking about gathering together. Christmas and New Year's is around the corner. It's not quite last minute, but it is still a little bit close. I mean, what, like when you search for flights and everything, like what do you typically see when when it comes to Christmas and New Year's and any kind of winter travel?
It's interesting because we're seeing a lot of January, February availability. So like prices for 2021 Q1 are really great. I'm not seeing as much for specifically like Christmas Eve or winter break right now. But I think what's going to happen is I think there's going to be a bit of last minute fluctuation here. Because, I'll respond to a question that Josh Sokolo put in the chat here. He was saying, are there cheap flights because airlines are struggling? I wouldn't say, they are, yes. Like no doubt about it, they are. I would say the issue with pricing this year is that airline pricing models, haven't accounted for the weird rise and fall in demand. it's very unpredictable. So a lot of the automated tools that do a good job of predicting yield and like who's going to be buying tickets, how much they're willing to pay under normal circumstances just don't work very well. So they're kind of flying by the seat of their pants. I think that's a good way to look at it, is that airlines we're very ill prepared in terms of their tools for a situation like this one. And that's why we saw so many,
Right.
so many really dirt cheap fares at the beginning of the year, like these $20 fares all around the country, because the computer that's making that pricing decision just had no idea what to do when people weren't buying those.
Well, that could be good for those of us who probably haven't, like me, I haven't booked anything yet, and I'm still just deciding on like when to go see my family and what to do, and given that we are in the middle of a pandemic still, like how to do it safely. One thing, speaking of visiting family a little bit safely, you could always do a road trip, or Jenny, you had a really good tip about flying into a hub and then driving. I thought that was good if you want to share it.
Yeah, because something that we're seeing right now is that flying to regional destinations, so smaller airports, that's been cut down quite a bit. So if you're trying to get into a small airport in like the Midwest or something where I'm from, that's where capacity has been cut quite a bit. So there's not going to be a lot of extra available seats floating around. But it's surprising if you're flying between major hubs, how many seats are actually available, because domestic airlines like United and American especially are putting these big wide body planes like 777s in service. There's just so much capacity. So it's shocking, actually, if you want to fly to a big city and drive, how cheap flights can be even now to a certain extent. I mean, they're not going to be your best fares ever, obviously. If you are booking for January, you'll get a better deal. But if you need to go home, want to go see family, it's worth looking at, even if it's something you wouldn't normally do. Although you want to watch, make sure if you're driving in a big metro, don't get stuck in traffic, obviously.
I know, right? So for instance, like say for instance, you're from Indiana, like originally, like you said, you were, fly into maybe O'Hare and then rent a car and then drive to Indiana. Like that may be a cheaper option or an alternate option if you're looking about like, getting the cheapest flight overall.
It's something I would consider doing that to a greater extent than I normally would. Just because, like, for example, I fly between Houston and Indianapolis fairly often, not this year, of course, but in general. Normally that wouldn't be too expensive. That'd be easy enough to find capacity on that route. But a lot of the, a lot of the smaller regional jets are not flying. So probably I would look and say like, hey, can I fly in a wide body plane from Houston to Chicago? And then is it worth my time to, have someone pick me up or rent a car and drive to where I'm going in Indiana? I think that a lot of these lessons are a little different this year than what they would normally be, because that sort of thing, normally wouldn't be worthwhile for me. But in this particular instance, it might well be.
Yeah, getting creative, being more flexible with your travel plans, I think is really it's always a good rule of thumb to have when you're looking for cheap flights in general, but looking for cheap flights or flights right now, being flexible is a good thing to keep in mind for sure. Pop in your questions, friends. We got a couple good ones here. But yeah, anything related to travel, if you have questions about that, or anything related to holiday travel in particular, that is our theme today. So definitely pop them in the chat and we will put them up there. One thing too, Daniel, I was been thinking about for Christmas and New Year's and later this year is, the like you were saying, like the period right in, around Christmas and New Year's is always really, really expensive. So think about, to the point of being flexible, traveling a little bit maybe before that or like right after that. Flights may be cheaper. What do you think?
I would say so. I mean, looking at 2020, it's maybe not going to be as different as it would normally be. Because I think, when I think back to previous years, you would get to the point where there probably wouldn't be available seats at all if you're trying to fly on like Christmas Eve or December 23rd or something like that. Whereas now it's actually surprisingly, it's easy to get seats. It's not like airlines are selling out by any means. But it's shocking what you can find at once in a while. Another one that kind of surprised me: business class fares are really down because there's not a lot of corporate travel. So like, there's been a few instances I've seen where flying like business class domestically is only $100 to $200 more than flying coach. So I don't know if this is not a good tip or a hack exactly, but it's something that's frequently true. Is that if you're not happy with the economy class price, look at the business class price, and you might be surprised that it's not that much higher. So that's kind of interesting and saves you money on baggage and stuff like that. So there's like a very narrow wedge right now normally there would be a big gap. But in cases, especially if you're flying like within the eastern U.S., within the western U.S., like not trying to go super far, kind of those medium haul flights, it's actually quite surprising. We're not sending a lot of that because it's still higher than what we would normally like to see in our DLMLs, but it's out there.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that's awesome. I mean, if I can get a business class seat for only a little bit more, but I have like all the room and all the comfort, hey, I'm getting it. Interesting question here from Mario. A little bit different topic, but I think it's one of our more popular destinations we like. Hey guys, any updates on when Japan will be ready for tourism? I heard April.
I have heard April too, but it is still rumored at this point. So I wouldn't, if I hadn't already booked something, I wouldn't book with the hope that will happen. If you have tickets in April, I would feel somewhat optimistic because you're starting to see some travel bubbles actually be announced. I know Singapore and Hong Kong are actually formalizing like a regional travel arrangement. So I think I'm optimistic to think that probably by Q2 around that time, we will start seeing Japan and probably some other countries in East Asia, maybe Korea and Taiwan as well, starting to open. But I wouldn't be to the point where I would speculatively book travel on that news until it's something more significant has been announced.
And here's an interesting thing too, y'all, about the deals that we send out. We are sending them for the future. So when you do see a deal from us and it's say to Europe, to a country, over in Asia, something like that, and you're like, well, there's a travel restrictions now. Yes, it may be true that the travel restriction is right now, but keep in mind that those are always fluid and frequently changing. And so we're thinking about for the future, which goes in line with what we say a lot about you always want to book farther in advance. And, we're sending deals with airlines that have flexible change policies and no change fees as well. Yeah. Really good, similar question about Jonathan about the future of travel. He says, what did it pop up here? Do you think travel will be changed forever or big change post-COVID?
This is an interesting one. I think I'm kind of a stick in the mud about this. I think people don't learn from the past as much as they should. So I have a feeling that things might be less different than some of the most wide-ranging opinions would suggest. Like, I think certain things might stick. I think like with hotels, you'll see a lot more emphasis on marketing around cleanliness. You'll see a lot more contactless options. Like, I think that kind of thing will continue. I think a lot of people are going to realize they like outdoor dining. Like, this is something I joke about here in Bloomington, Indiana, where I am right now. Like, there's a certain allergy in the Midwest to dining outdoors. And yet here we are in November, people are lining the sidewalks at cafes and things like that. That's something that I think is a good idea that probably should have been done years ago and will probably stick because people like it. They're embracing it. But I think that a lot of fundamental changes, I don't know. I don't think that we as travelers and humans are going to change that much in the long term, but I could be wrong. I kind of hope that I am wrong in some cases. That's just my opinion, of course.
Oh, I totally agree. I think that some of the changes that we're making right now, health-wise, will stick afterward just because people have embraced it for one reason or another. They found that they like it, more outdoors and, like you said, contactless travel when you're in the airport, things like that. Here's a really interesting one from Megan Elizabeth. I like this one, but our favorite destinations. What are your favorite destinations to travel during this time of year? And someone else asked about Hawaii. So Daniel, you go first. What are your favorite destinations during this time of year?
I was joking with one of my colleagues about going to Finland in the winter. Like, I actually really love going to Europe in the winter, especially in Scandinavia, because it's a place where people really know how to embrace the season. It's a cozy place to be as long as you're properly dressed, of course. The relatively early sunset doesn't really bother me too much. So I love going to places off peak. And I don't mind going to cold destinations either. I think the same is true of Canada. Like, I spent, a really nice week in January a few years ago in Quebec City. Beautiful. It's all decorated and cozy and no other tourists there. So I would think that it's nice to go to places that get cold. That's not the popular opinion sometimes. You have to carry a little bit more extra luggage maybe if you need, coats and boots and things if you're expecting snow. And it maybe makes it a little bit harder to jump from one country to another, like if you're carrying more stuff. But that's what I like to do. And the same is true in the U.S. I mean, I love going to, places like Chicago or something like that, where it's definitely off season.
Right, right. And I think I would be a little bit more traditional and say, because I live in Montana, it's snowing here right now. I would like to go somewhere that's not snowing right now. So I will be in the Caribbean. If I could pick a place to go in the wintertime, I'll be on the beach. Where I'll definitely be. Daniel, getting back to traveling this time of the year, folks wanting to see their families. Any other kind of tips or hacks for people who want to grab a cheap ticket to get home? Maybe we're thinking about New Year's now, a little bit further out. What would you have advice for those folks?
Well, the first thing is more of a question, actually. I'm curious to know how many people are flying, or rather I should say this year, how many people are driving to destinations they might have flown to in the past, because I think there's it's really interesting. I was just chatting with a friend of mine also who lives in Houston, and she was stopping to visit me while I was on vacation in North Carolina a few weeks ago. So she was actually making a long road trip kind of through the eastern U.S. to visit some family and friends, stopping along the way. You can actually make a much more of an itinerary about trying to get somewhere if you're working remotely now than you could before. So I think maybe the first thing to say is don't. If it's expensive to fly directly to where you want to go at the holidays, put some stops along the way, go some places along the interstate that you might not have considered going before. This is something that I'll probably do because I'm not going to be flying for Christmas, for example, but I might go visit some relatives and stuff, and do some socially distant activities like that. But try and bake some things into that. Some places that you wouldn't normally go just for a destination on their own.
That is really true, and there are some. Along the lines of putting in stops along the way and discovering things along your road trip, while you're, off to see family. There are some really cool, road trippy books about awesome things to do in Pennsylvania, along your way on your road trip. So be fun about it while you're trying to maybe socially distance and things like that. It's really, you could probably make a trip out of it. One story I'll have about Thanksgiving and travel. So when I was little, I'm from Chicago originally. My extended family lives in Atlanta, and we would drive every year for Thanksgiving. And it would be great going down, not a ton of traffic because we would leave, pretty early in the week to get there. But on the way back, keep in mind that a lot of people, especially this year, are going to be driving. And so on the way back, there's probably going to be a lot of traffic on that Saturday and Sunday after Thanksgiving. So if you're in and around a big city, just plan accordingly because it's going to get kind of busy. Let's see what other kind of questions we have here. Pop your questions in the chat. If it's holiday travel related or just a general travel question, definitely happy to answer them as we continue talking here.
And I will point out, so there's been several questions about specific reopening dates for a variety of countries. And one of our friends here just posted in the kayak.com travel restrictions webpage. I would definitely recommend that as a good resource because it's going to be much more up to date about what is currently open and closed than my knowledge would be. So I think that's a good place to start if you want to see okay, where can I actually go right now? Because a lot of the countries we talked about, like Europe, not conveniently open right now, but there are some that are if you're in the mood for that.
Yes. Let's see what other questions we got here. Here's one about Cuba from our friend Audrey. When will travel to Cuba resume?
Now, I wouldn't want to put a date to it, but what I will say is I think it's probably likely that next year we might see a return to more of the Obama-era regulations on travel to Cuba, because you'll remember that some of the permissible reasons to go to Cuba for tourism were reduced. So what I would love to see, hopefully, post-COVID, is a return to independent travel to Cuba, where you could go back on your own without being so tied to cruises or group travel. So I don't know the specific date, but I'm optimistic that it'll be a destination that's more available to American travelers once again.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the summertime, because this is not actually something people typically think about, is booking summer travel now. But a good rule of thumb is to book it for the opposite season that you're in. So when you're in the summertime, that's a good time to be thinking about where you're going to travel during the wintertime, the holiday time, and book it then. In the same vein, now that we're coming into the wintertime, it's a good time to be thinking about summer travel and booking it. What are your thoughts on that, Daniel?
Well, it was about 2 weeks ago that we saw our first big flood of European fares for next summer coming in. So I think it's actually, yeah, you're right. It's the time to start thinking about that peak season travel to, particularly Europe. I would say we've been seeing a lot of good fares coming up through September of 2021 for Alaska. And the same for a lot of these destinations is that you're not going to see really good winter fares to countries that are closed right now, because they have a lot of capacity controls on, who can enter and leave. There's not a lot of air traffic between the US and places like Europe right now. But, I think I feel pretty confident planning, 9 months down the road for this kind of thing, or, looking into, August and September travel. I think the same might actually be true soon of Australia and New Zealand. From what we've heard in the news, those will probably remain closed to tourism through maybe Q3 of next year. Don't set your watch to this because a lot can change. But I would think that we would start to see those coming back in, to commercial availability soon. So that's another one to think if you're like, maybe I want to go next October, next November. We're just getting to that in the calendar in terms of what tickets are available for sale. But I would start planning it out. For me, that's what I'm doing actually, is I'm thinking like, okay, if I know roughly that I want to go somewhere 8 to 9 months from now, I know I want to work up that itinerary so I'm ready to book when I see it. If I want to go to Europe, or if I want to do these things, it's like, here's what I would do in 10 days. Here's the cities I want to watch. I'm going to start putting these flight alerts in so I can send these out to people. But it's good to have that plan in place, and it's a good quarantine time activity certainly to work on it as well.
Absolutely. And I do the same thing, like start thinking now. And as Scott likes to say, book in pencil, not pen, because you can start to make those travel plans. You can start to be on the lookout. And then when you see something, start to think, okay, what does this fit in? Especially if you have specific travel dates in a specific place you want to go. Thinking about that earlier rather than later and being on the lookout will be good. And like Daniel was saying, yes, some of these places are closed to travelers now, but things are frequently changing. And by next summer or even a little bit after that, it could be different, which is why you want to book in pencil. So keep popping your questions in here. Daniel, any other tips you have for people for wanting to get some cheap flights around this time of year and thinking into the next year?
Well,
any trends that you're seeing?
Well, one thing, I don't know, I'm not always sure how much people here are as into points and miles as we are in cheap cash fares, but I'll say award availability on nearly all airlines for next year is just crazily open. So, if you're like me and you're kind of sitting on this golden egg of Chase or Amex points, don't hoard those forever. If you have any sort of transferable currency or points, this is a very good time to invest them. The other thing too is if you have basically some sort of travel credit, from an airline, like I've got a few $100s of United travel credit that I for a trip I canceled from the summer. This is a good time to speculatively invest on those. Like put them towards a trip next year that you think you want to take, that you think you could do. The nice thing is you can cancel it. You can just get that money right back. It doesn't even cost you anything because it's already sitting in the coffers of the airline. So I would say, like, if you have all these little unique tools, make sure that you're employing them right now to their maximum efficiency, because it's a good time, first of all, because fares are low, availability of seats is high, but they'll probably gradually become less valuable over time. These are not investments. They are things to spend, basically.
Yeah, and to that point too, with a lot of the vouchers, I mean, I even have vouchers myself. I was supposed to go to London this past April, obviously right when the pandemic hit. So I have a voucher to spend. And I'll check the policy of your vouchers, because a lot of times the date that you have is a book by date, not necessarily the when you have to fly by. In theory, you could book your ticket before that date. Say your date you have to book by is December 31st, 2021. Book it, but your travel could be in 2022, which gives you more time to figure out what's going on with travel restrictions. So definitely check all of the fine print and the policies around that voucher to see if your ticket is a book by date. I know that mine is, and I could fly later as long as I book it by a certain date.
I'll add one interesting thing to that too, because a lot of the formal travel waivers that we have at domestic U.S. airlines like United, American, Delta, a lot of those waivers will expire December 31st. And what the airlines have done, obviously, they made a big move of eliminating and reducing a lot of change fees for the future. So those changes generally apply to domestic travel. They generally apply to North American travel at a lot of those airlines. So if you're going to Canada or Mexico or something, they don't usually apply in most cases to transcontinental flights to Europe or Asia or something like that. So keep in mind that if you want to make a very speculative booking of a trip you would like to do, but you're not sure if you will either want to go for health reasons or for whatever, think about making that speculative booking by the end of December, because that's going to be the time when you can lock in that unusual degree of flexibility for that particular kind of flying.
Absolutely. Let's see if we have any other good comments too. Let's do one more. Danny, do you have time for one more question?
Of course.
Let's see. All right, let's do this one from Allison. She asks, tell me your thoughts on traveling to Hawaii now or in the future.
Well, so it's very, in a very high profile sense, it is possible to go now. I think for me, it's something I'm going to hold off on because I love Hawaii. I've been briefly. I've used it as a transit point to and from Asia a couple times. I really like it. I think the time is not quite right for what I like to do, because I like to experience a destination like that when it's a little bit more normal, when I can go, do restaurants and things like that. So I think even with the new testing regime in place, like, it's not so much that I would feel unsafe as a traveler, but it's that there's a lot of additional burdens associated with that I kind of just don't want to deal with when I'm on vacation. And I think that's how I feel about it. Not to say that I wouldn't make a booking for next year, probably, if something came along that I really wanted to do. I think that's the key, is like, I'm not the type to rush to the beach, but I am the type to say, okay, if there's a good fare, I'll book that for next summer or, down the road.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely something to keep in mind when we're thinking about travel. It's like, okay, yes, maybe we can go, but how will the experience be? Should we just wait a little bit longer and keep our eye out? Because we're always finding good flights to Hawaii. So definitely something we'll keep our eyes out for. But thanks everyone for hopping on, chatting with us for a little bit about holiday travel and just your flight questions in general. Definitely keep popping your questions in the chat. Even after we close out, we'll try to come back through and answer all of your questions because we weren't able to get to everyone today. But thank you so much for joining. It's been really great.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Bye, everyone.